Welcome to the Nightclub, guys. It's your host, the Night Wrencher. I've been getting tons and tons of comments about my welder, if I like it, if I hate it, how well does it weld, is it affordable, is it worth it? And today I'm going to go ahead and answer all of these questions. This is a welder I've been using throughout all of my welding tutorial videos. If you guys are interested, go ahead and check those out. So in case anybody doesn't know, this is the Vulcan, aka Harbor Freight Omnipro 220. This is essentially the top of the line welder. Also, if it sounds like I'm kind of yelling or raising my voice, it's because my entire barn is powered by a generator, and my generator is actually really loud, even though it's all the way over there. So I do have to tend to raise my voice when trying to film these kinds of videos at nighttime. As I was saying, this is the Vulcan 220, and this is essentially Harbor Freight's flagship welder. They sell tons and tons of these welders, and I'm going to go through all the good stuff, and then at the end of the video I'm going to go through all the bad stuff about this welder that I don't necessarily like. So the cool stuff is that this is a multi-process welder, which means it can do MIG, it can do TIG, and it can do stick welding as well as other processes. So if I go back to the main screen, oh, it's also a full digital display, which is also really neat. Going through the option menu, you have MIG Steel C25, which is a gas mixture. You also have MIG Steel C100, which is another gas mixture. You have standard Flux Core. You have MIG for stainless steel. You have MIG manual CV, which I actually have no idea what it means. We have a spool gun in case you want to add an optional spool gun. This is a 4043, essentially for welding aluminum without TIG welding, but you are going to need gas for this. You also have a secondary option for a different type of spool gun. Then you have standard stick welding, and then you have TIG, and then you have the standard settings. Because this welder is fully digital, it basically gives you unlimited options when it comes to the actual settings. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Flux Core because that's most of the stuff that I use, and then the next screen will tell you how to set up your machine, which is actually really important because it takes away all the guesswork out of trying to figure out what you're supposed to do for what type of material, for what type of gas. It essentially takes the guesswork out of everything. So we're doing Flux Core, we're doing electrode negative, we're doing ground clamp positive, and we're going to go ahead and confirm. The next screen will ask you about the wire size, which is 030 and 035 are the only options that it gives you. And the second option is the metal thickness, which is 18 gauge all the way down to 10 gauge. Then you go ahead and hit confirm. And then once you hit confirm, it'll give you the base settings for you to start off at, and then you can go ahead and modify them from there. You can change wire speed, you can change volts, and after that your machine is essentially good to go and ready to start welding. A quick side note, I always get asked what kind of gloves that I use. I really like these TIG gloves offered by Harbor Freight. They're the matching Vulcan brand, and they're really thin, they're really light, they're really flexible, and they tend to protect you really well. This is like my third or fourth pair in the last couple years, and I really like them, especially when you're tack welding a lot or you're fitting a lot. When I go and switch over to doing beads, especially on thicker materials, I tend to go with like the heavier gloves, the thicker gloves. But for something like very light work, easy work, nothing beats these TIG gloves. They're really cheap. They're like $10–15. So go ahead and pick yourselves up a pair. Not sponsored, I'm just letting you guys know. I mentioned that I'm welding with Flux Core, so I actually have Flux Core wire. This is 035 wire. And if you're going to be using the MIG, you're actually going to be using a different type of wire. You're basically going to be using solid core, which is a copper colored wire. And as you guys can see, I have my power cord hooked up, as well as the gas inlet, which I'm not currently using. Switching between the modes is actually very simple. They're all twist connections called DINN connectors, and they're essentially just a round stub with a little stub attached to it, and you can move them from one to the other depending on what you need, and then the opposite one gets hooked up to whatever you need here. So it comes with all these different cables, so you'll either have this ground clamp, you'll have the stick holder for when you're welding stick, it comes with a 220 adapter wire, and then more importantly, this actually has a plug that'll go straight to a regular cord in 110, which is really cool because I can take more advantage of the amps provided by my generator. Although it's set up to do 220, 110 basically does all the functions that you need it to do. There's only a handful of things that the 220 functions open up that the standard 110 can't. But if you want to weld anything from, like, let's say 1/4 inch and lower, you can definitely do that with a standard 120 plug. You don't actually have to go with a 220. Sure, you won't be able to get as hot and you won't be able to get as intricate as you can with the 220 welder, but I mean, for the cost of just a standard cord and an outlet, it's pretty much worth it just to stay to 110. Although my generator is 220 capable, I've been doing stick and MIG just on the standard 110 and I've had no problems. I will find a way to upgrade to the 220 functions once I find a way to get that into my barn, and that way I can weld much thicker plates with my stick welding function. Moving on to what I don't like about this welder. The first thing that I notice is that the actual gun, the MIG gun, is very insensitive. When you push the trigger, you don't actually get that response time like I used to with my Lincoln welder. And sometimes the gun doesn't even respond at all and I have to either shake it or press it or hit it up against something for the gun to actually start responding. There's actually a write-up online in order for you to replace this gun for a better gun that'll give you a better response time, but that's actually more money that you have to add to the welder. So the MSRP on this welder, I believe right now, is $1,100. Back when I picked it up, it was $999, $999, but then I was able to get like a 20% off discount, so it went down to like 800 something after tax, which is not too bad for a welder that can do everything. The problem here is that it's not a complete unit. It doesn't have everything you're actually going to need. You noticed earlier that I said that I use Flux Core wire and I use the stick probe, but I don't use any kind of gas. And the reason for that is because I don't want to have the extra expense filling up a gas cylinder, buying the gas cylinder, and then going through all the gas while you're trying to weld with the standard MIG. The only way I would be able to convince myself to add a gas cylinder is if I actually added the TIG function to this welder, which it actually does not come with it. So if you guys don't know, although this is set up as a multi-process machine, the only two things you can do is actually standard MIG and stick welding, along with a little bit of Flux Core right there, because it does come with a little gas valve, but it doesn't come with anything else. So if you want to do stick welding out of the box, you're good to go. If you want to do regular MIG, you're good to go. And if you want to do Flux Core welding, you are good to go. But if you want to do TIG, you have to buy the pedal, you have to buy the torch, you have to buy the tungstens, you have to buy all that stuff in addition to the welder itself. Secondly, if you want to weld with the spool gun and you don't want to learn how to do TIG, you're going to have to buy the spool gun, which is another several $100s in expense. So you consider that this is $1,100 plus $200 or $300 or $400 depending on what you guys get, and that's if you guys don't decide to replace the MIG gun on this welder, which I actually am considering for myself. I also mentioned that this welder basically came incomplete, as in it can only do MIG and stick. So if your whole point is to actually just have a standard MIG welder without the intention of ever purchasing either a spool gun or everything that you need to do a TIG, then it's actually worthless to buy the Omnipro 220. It doesn't make any sense at all. Another problem is that while I was welding with Flux Core, I quickly needed to switch over to stick. And although it's not difficult, it is time consuming. You have to take off your ground clamp, switch it over to the next one, grab your stick holders, move it out to here, put your other leads away, bust out the sticks, and coil everything else on. It's kind of like a little bit of a hassle. And I started to notice that I realized why the professional quote-unquote welders have multiple machines. Is because if you want to do something with no gas, you can go ahead and have a machine set up for no gas. And if you want something that needs or requires gas, like if you want to do stainless exhaust or whatever, you have a machine specifically for that. Now that I've noticed how the workflow is, especially when doing high production stuff, when I have to switch between different items, it's almost like when you're going from only owning one grinder to owning two grinders. You have one with a grinding wheel and then you have one with the flap disc, and it makes all the world of a difference. Or if you have one with the flap disc and you have one with the cutting wheel, same thing. It is just so much easier. It speeds up so much of your time, and you can apply that time to whatever project you're trying to do as fast as you can. And because we are hobbyists, we do need to finish our things fairly quickly because we have other things to do. The opposite to that is if you can't afford two smaller machines that do independent things, or you don't have enough room in your shop to actually have two welders, or if you don't want the hassle of owning two different machines, then actually owning one machine that can do pretty much both things is actually worth it if you don't mind dealing with the hassle of switching back and forth between wire, or between your stick welding stuff, or between your torch stuff. Pretty much the moment you've all been waiting for, would I recommend this welder? It's kind of a complicated answer. I would say yes, and I would say no. Yes, because it gives you the option to do everything, and it's a really reliable machine. I have very little problems with it. I've taken it in very dirty, dusty, sandy environments, and it has been doing fine. Everything still works fine. I have a lot of hours on this machine, and I've had no problems with it. My problem is that it's actually an incomplete machine. After you buy everything and you do the upgrades, you're going to be $1,500 into this machine. I think if that was the case, I would have maybe bought 2 separate machines, even if they were going to cost a hair more or a hair less. I think buying 2 machines over 1 big machine would have served my purpose a little bit better. But someone who wants to try to learn everything, which I guarantee you're not going to be able to learn everything proficiently, because there isn't enough time in the world to be able to do absolutely everything. Usually people who focus on something and want to build and learn how to do stuff, they usually focus on 1 or 2 processes at most, and that's because they want to use one process for thin metal and they want to use a second process for thick metal. So they really, having a multi-process welder doesn't do you a lot of good unless you want that option for maybe learning a 3rd or 4th or 5th process down the line. Now, as for purchasing the machine itself, the machine is very decent quality. It's not that heavy. It's easy to move around. It's mostly complete, and it can do pretty much everything. I've done a lot of work with this machine, and I've gotten a lot of stuff done. Because this machine has done so much work, it's pretty much already paid for itself within the year. Within the first couple months, this machine was already paid for because of the jobs I was able to do with it. Does it weld better than the name brand machines? I'm gonna actually say no, because I do have my old Weldpack 180 made by Lincoln, and that thing is 20 years old and it just lights like that. The welds are much crisper, much cleaner, much faster. It puts in much more heat, and it's overall, I think, a better machine for flux core welding. So if I had that here in my barn, I would set up that Lincoln welder here for flux core, and then I would set this one up here for doing pretty much everything else. That way I don't have to be switching out the spools of wire. So overall, it's a decent machine. If you want to get it, get it. If you want to think about future-proofing your shop, consider buying 2 different machines. Maybe buy what you want to weld first. If you want to learn TIG, buy a TIG welder. If you want to learn stick, buy a stick welder. If you want to, do that instead of buying something that'll do kind of everything kind of mediocre, and it's going to cost you a lot more money in the long run. Better to buy 2 machines that are perfectly set up for what you want to do than 1 machine that is kind of more or less doing it. But it's not a bad machine. It's not an awful machine. It's not an unreliable machine. It's a good machine. If you want to get it, go ahead and get it. That's all for today. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.